Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus, episode 42. I am the show's host, Kyle, and today is going to be another general news story day. I know I said I was going to have Will Porter, who co-authored an article with me that ran on libertarianinstitute.org, on to talk about Mosul, but just with my software stuff and our schedules, it did not work out this week. I should be getting a hold of him this weekend, and hopefully we're going to have that episode for you Monday or Wednesday next week. I'm really looking forward to doing a couple interview episodes. I hope that my skills at first aren't too rough. I've never actually interviewed anybody before. I hired somebody or helped hire somebody once, so I kind of like did that kind of interview, but never for like a radio show or anything like that. So I'm hoping it goes well, but that'll be something where any feedback is welcome, even if you're like, dude, that was awful, never do it again. Hey, at least I know that's what you guys think. So just to jump into the news before I chat away too much, we have Trump extending the nuclear deal sanctions relief to Iran for another 6 months. There was some question on whether Trump would do this or not, but not much. From my understanding, that for Trump to have been able to carry or put these sanctions back on Iran, they would have had to have pretty good proof, and it would have had to be kind of accepted in the international community. So I do think that the Iran nuclear issue is very important, and that we stay on top of it, and that we continue to debunk the myth every time it comes up. I know it's such a pain. It's so awful that every time the state comes up with another Iran nuclear weapons scare, they're going to have weapons tomorrow and they have a secret nuclear weapons program. You just want to sigh and roll your eyes and say, well, I'm going to tell you why I told you the past 40 times you made this argument. Iran's never been, hasn't been building nuclear weapons at least since 2003, possibly never had a program. They're certainly not trying to build nuclear weapons now, and like I said, since 2003 haven't been. They don't have rockets to fire them. The U.S. is at no threat from an Iranian nuclear weapon whatsoever, and will not be for the foreseeable future, is how I guess I would phrase it, years, maybe decades. And so this delusional idea that continues to come up in the mainstream narrative all the time, like I said, it frustrates me a lot, is that Iran is building nuclear bombs and they're in a technical violation of the nuclear deal for this reason, or they might have too much heavy water. I mean, there were times where I guess Iran ended up with like being pretty close to the limit on how much heavy water they're allowed to have, but the U.S. is preventing the sale of their heavy water to other countries, and so it's one of those situations where you're really forcing somebody to fail. And even then, Iran was able to get the heavy water out in time. So they, even with the U.S. working against them on a nuclear deal that really benefits the United States allies in Saudi Arabia and Israel, we continue to work against them and propagandize that the Iranians are moving closer to a nuclear weapon when it simply isn't true. And so Trump has to extend these sanctions because unless there's support from the international community for the U.S. propaganda that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program, or if Iran ends up pursuing a nuclear weapons program, I guess I shouldn't rule out that possibility. I think that enough U.S. hostility towards Iran may cause Iran to once again move in that direction, hoping that would be a deterrent from the U.S. attacking them, kind of like the example Kim Jong-un sends in North Korea. However, not to want to look like he's carrying out a deal in good faith, Mr. Donald Trump has to slap some extra sanctions on some Iranian military generals. Typically what happens is the U.S. will pick 10 Iranian National Guard, I believe it's the Royal National Guard, will pick like 10 of the officers and just say, oh, now you can't do any businesses overseas and any business you're doing in the U.S. is frozen. I have to guess by this point that most of the people who could possibly have sanctions put on them probably don't have any connection to anything in the U.S. for this fear. Where this does become a problem is the U.S. controls enough of the international banking system that it makes it impossible for these people to wire money out of the country. So a lot of times what will happen is some general's daughter is attending school at Oxford and he'll no longer be able to send her money for food. I mean, we all went to college and, well, not all of us, but for all of us who did go to college know that most of the time when you're at college, you know, your parents, when they can, they send you a couple bucks every now and then. And I'm sure that an Iranian military general's daughter is, getting thousands of dollars sent to her when, maybe we are only getting $5. But the principle remains the same, that this is just kind of a normal human thing that people do, is they send money to their children overseas, and it has nothing to do with terrorist activity or any other crackpot theory you could come up with. However, that the U.S. will put these sanctions on and only harm harm, the families of Iranians. Of course, this is never going to motivate the generals to turn, or the officers to turn against the Iranian government and say, oh, well, the U.S. sanctioned me, now I'm going to go against my government. Of course, this is going to just make them more hostile towards the United States, which, could become a problem because the United States is at least working with, if not directly supporting, Iranian-linked groups in Iraq fighting against ISIS. And so if you were to upset enough Iranians, and there's Iranians fighting either alongside the U.S. forces or at least U.S.-backed forces in Iraq, maybe they start to take some of that hostility out there. Not something that I'm saying will happen or is likely to happen, but I think it's something that we always need to consider, that these situations aren't cut and dry, and that just because it might sound good to put some sanctions on Iranian military officers, there's always that potential blowback, and we have a lot of troops in that area that could be the reception of that blowback. So we had this really interesting story coming out of D.C. The Turkish government, Erdogan's bodyguards, ended up squaring off with some pro-Kurdish protesters. I think quite a few of the protesters were Kurdish people themselves, with some other protesters who just support the Kurdish movement mixed in. To me, it looked like the fight was pretty one-sided, and it looked to me like the Turkish government obviously was the first one to use physical aggression in any serious manner. I don't know, maybe somebody bumped into somebody out of camera view or something, but the first punches and stuff were definitely thrown by the Turkish Erdogan's bodyguards. The protesters it looked to me, I saw a couple pro-YPG signs. I didn't see any pro-PKK signs. I think that PKK is a terrorist organization on the international level, like the U.S. endorses it, so I would be surprised to see any pro-PKK people for that reason. That might be illegal, or at least will get you a lot of unpleasant visits from the FBI. You might not be able to hop on a plane for a few years if you're pro-PKK. So the protesters were out there. Erdogan's visiting D.C., so Erdogan's bodyguards are there. The protesters, I guess, are probably saying some pretty nasty things about Erdogan, and some of them may be true, some of them may be culturally insensitive. I don't know what they're saying. I'm sure it's nasty. Erdogan's a pretty nasty guy towards the Kurds, and so it seemed to me like it was a pretty hostile, protest. Not in that they were threatening any physical violence, but they were certainly very displeased. And they weren't just out there asking Erdogan nicely to leave him alone. So Erdogan's bodyguards come out and attack these protesters, and it didn't seem like there was any threat to Turkey or anybody in the Turkey delegation, I guess would be the best way to say it, from these protesters. And I think there's a couple, right at the end of that video, you'll see one of Erdogan's bodyguards go back and just boot some guy laying on the ground in the face. And the guy laying on the ground wasn't somebody that was able to put up a fight against this guy. There was clear physical ability differences between the guy who kicked the guy in the face and the guy who was laying on the ground. And then you kind of go off, and then you kind of look off scene, and you got like a DC cop running after one of Erdogan's bodyguards, trying to hold him back from going and trying to do the same thing to some other guy. And so, first of all, just the imagery of this poor Kurdish, I believe that the guy who was kicked in the face was probably Kurdish. He looked like he possibly was. I believe I saw that report somewhere, but I'm not sure. So if he's not, my apologies. And this guy, one of Erdogan's bodyguards, goes and just boots the guy in the face. And this is exactly what Turkey's doing to the Kurdish people. And so while there is some blowback from the PKK into Turkey and targeting of Turkish citizens, which is certainly morally reprehensible and unjustified, but there's a clear power difference, and the Turkish government clearly dominates the Kurdish people, and Erdogan imprisons Kurdish journalists and Kurdish teachers and Kurdish politicians, and makes it impossible for the Kurds to ever get ahead and to ever have any success and to really live really good lives. And even if there is a small Kurdish militia that fights against Turkey with physical violence, I think part of this is probably the only defense the PKK could really ever muster against the Turkish government, and maybe they see it as their only form of protection. Which, again, not justified. You can't go out and target civilians because the government's picking on you, but from the Kurdish standpoint, I think they kind of throw their hands up and say, well, what else are we supposed to do then? the Turkey just keeps bombing us and killing our civilians and imprisoning us. And Erdogan certainly has imprisoned a lot since he gained emergency powers on July 16th, 2016, the day after the failed coup in Turkey. And this happening, I didn't see any of Erdogan's bodyguards get arrested. There were a couple of protesters who got arrested. And so that's really a shame that at the end of the day, then you had the U.S. cops walking the Kurdish bodyguards back to their cars while their cops are busy arresting the poor protesters who are just saying, please stop harming us. And it just insanity. I guess maybe when I bring on Will or one of my other guests, I'll talk a lot about the Turkey, Kurd, Syria, U.S. situation, because, there's a lot of moving pieces there. It's very interesting. We have Canada sending some peacekeepers, quote-unquote peacekeepers, to, I believe, Mali in Africa there to help to rein in some of that civil war going on in that country. Really, this wouldn't be something I would ever talk about on the show, but I read the article, and man, this was an interesting article, because what Canada is doing is they're calling these peacekeepers, these people peacekeepers, but really they're Turkish, I got Turkey on the brain. They're Canadian soldiers who are going and doing advising and assisting roles like the U.S. is doing in Syria and Iraq and other countries around the Middle East and in Africa. And so I think this is a really good bit of propaganda. I guess from just a purely marketing point on Canada's part, this is a brilliant move. They're going to be able to lie right to their population. They're going to say, you're sending peacekeepers to Mali. And all the people will cheer and cast their votes, because whenever a politician says, I'm promoting peace, people get really happy. And peacekeepers sound like people supporting peace, but these aren't. These are going to be people who are on one side of the fight, who are helping to advise. They're going to help to pit the targets. They're going to say where to attack. They're going to follow them on missions. And then whenever the native, whoever they are, like the Malian soldiers, get pinned down or anything like that, the Canadian soldiers will be right there with them, and they'll help them shoot back. And so the government of Canada is now waging a war and calling it a peacekeeping mission. And this is, in a way, I guess this is what Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama did to Gaddafi and Libya. But this is just, to actually call it peacekeeping is a brilliant piece of newspeak. The psyops there is awesome. I'm sure there's a couple people at the Pentagon that got fired for not thinking of that one. Two stories in Venezuela I want to touch on. One is that the U.S. put sanctions on 8 members of the Venezuelan Supreme Court. I guess these are seen as sanctions put in for humanitarian reasons. The Supreme Court has really given the legal ability that the Maduro government needed to seize all the power that they've seized. I believe it was a month or two ago that the Supreme Court actually ruled that the Maduro government could dissolve the Congress when they want it. And so this has really put the Congress in a place where they can't even do anything in Venezuela at this point. So the court rubber stamped the executive's will, and I'm sure it probably got some kickbacks from the government. So the U.S. put sanctions on the leader of the Supreme Court and 7 other justices. I don't know how many members are on the Venezuelan Supreme Court. 2 more civilians were killed in the protests. I believe this brings the total up to like 42. 2 things the U.S. could learn from these stories. One would be just that the courts justifying and okaying the legality of executive power grabs is not acceptable and will lead you to a place where the executive, with the power it wields from the judicial branch, could dissolve the legislative branch. And obviously that's a huge problem and is something that should be looked out for in the U.S. I think just the perception of the Supreme Court's powers is really unchecked, and if they grant that power then to the executive branch to wield it and enforce it, you have a dictatorship. The second thing is that the Venezuelan prosecutor actually charged a police officer for killing one of these protesters. So I don't know if this guy will even end up facing charges or a trial or end up with any jail time or the appropriate amount of jail time. However, at least they're arresting and charging these people. So that does seem like a surprising a bit of justice coming out of Venezuela. And I guess one of the benefits we focus on, maybe there is some chance for a rebuilding there. In Africa, we have Al-Shabaab enforcing Islamic law in South Somalia. I broke down past episodes who controls what in Somalia. That's really not relevant to this story, but in the areas that Al-Shabaab controls, they cut off the hands of 2 guys for stealing about $500 worth of stuff. So who knows that these people are actually guilty. I'm sure that the courts in Somalia probably aren't carrying out the best justice in the world, but yeah, they got their hands removed for stealing, and so this is the result of U.S. interventionism. Always remember that the U.S. led Somalia down the path that it's on now, and the U.S. has encouraged the interventions that led to the rise of Al-Shabaab and the Al-Shabaab's taking of like 25-30% of the country. We also have Al-Shabaab killing 3 Somali soldiers with a car bomb, and this did occur in the capital of Mogadishu, which is not a city currently controlled by Al-Shabaab. After the U.S. Really got the Ethiopians involved in killing all the different groups in Somalia, the group that remained and rose up was Al-Shabaab, and they actually at one point did take Mogadishu, and then the U.S. spat the African Union in coming in and kicking out the Al-Shabaab from the capital of Mogadishu. However, it still leaves the huge problem that Al-Shabaab controls a lot of the country, and there doesn't seem to be anything anyone could really do about that at this point, and then the way they're treating people there is absolutely horrendous. I read a story saying that Special Forces operations in Africa is really America's hidden war. Apparently there's an average of 96 Special Forces operations per day. I don't know exactly what this means. Maybe one of my people I talked to next week will be able to tell me exactly what this means. Does that mean just going on a patrol with a local militia is an operation for the special operations for Special Forces? I'm not really sure, but that does seem to me to be a lot, and this is going on in quite a few, in the double digits of countries, maybe 20 or so. I think the article really highlights just how the U.S. has become so reliant on our special forces, and it's really a way to conduct hidden war. You could have the U.S. assisting assassinations, killings, wars in 20 African countries at a single time, and the American people not know that the U.S. has a troop in Africa. They might say, oh, there might be some in Egypt or Libya or something like that, but certainly would not guess that there's U.S. troops in, I think, like 36 African countries. This all came about thanks to a very awesome FOIA request, so those things are real important. Anybody who's getting stuff FOIA'd definitely deserves a pat on the back. Saudi Arabia is looking to invest and create its own weapons industry. Up to this point, Saudi Arabia has basically let U.S. taxpayers pay for the research and development of weapons and then gone to the U.S. weapons manufacturers and pay them a lot of money for weapons. So, as always, the American people are getting the wrong end of this deal, but Saudi Arabia is now looking to do some of their own in-house stuff. I'm really wondering if Saudi Arabia is looking to become more military independent. I doubt they would want to break their relationship with the U.S., but I think the United States is probably like kind of holding Saudi Arabia back in a couple places and saying you can't do more, but Saudi Arabia could do it without the United States' help, then we could see Saudi Arabia become a lot more belligerent state in the region, or who knows, maybe it's America pushing them to do all this ridiculous stuff, and then once they buy a military from us, they won't do it anymore. But I think it's pretty likely that the U.S. is holding them back, and Obama did put some constraints on Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure Trump tells them not to slaughter too many Yemeni civilians. Afghanistan is to receive 159 Black Hawk helicopters from the U.S. I know there's some speculation on whether we will have another surge or not and how many troops will go, but we're certainly getting a surge of Black Hawks to Afghanistan. I think the reason this was done is that Afghanistan had about 60 helicopters, but they were Russian-made helicopters, and I guess for embargo or sanctions reasons, the U.S. can't buy and Afghanistan can't buy weapons from Russia, and so the U.S. was having India buy the helicopter parts from Russia and then selling them to Afghanistan. Of course, this is all paid for by the United States, so I had somebody ask me who was paying for the 159 helicopter sents to Africa. Well, the real answer is even if Afghanistan pays for it, the U.S. is paying Afghanistan, so Afghanistan can pay the U.S. NATO is considering entering the fray in the fight against ISIS. I'm not sure why NATO feels the need to do this, other than maybe to look relevant under Trump. Maybe this is, we know Trump likes tough people, and so we're going to act real tough. all the NATO countries are already a part of the coalition to fight against ISIS. I know some of these countries have actually backed off. I believe the Dutch have really backed off of the U.S. coalition to fight ISIS. So maybe this is the way that the U.S. is going to force other countries to subsidize the fight against ISIS by funneling the money through NATO. There are some countries that are fighting ISIS that are not a part of NATO and allied with the U.S., like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. I don't know what the overall effect of this will be unless it is, like I said before, to get other countries to spend more on the war in the war against ISIS. And this could even be a way for the U.S. to take more money from the U.S. taxpayers and support the war against ISIS. Because if NATO's paying for it, a lot of NATO money comes from the U.S. A lot comes from other countries too, but it would still be a pretty heavy burden on the U.S. taxpayers, like all these interventions. Late into the show, finally getting into the big story, and I really want to make sure I got to it, and that is what's going on in Syria. So yesterday afternoon, at least Eastern time, the U.S. coalition, a U.S. plane carrying out a strike that killed, from reports I have read, an unknown number of soldiers allied to the Syrian government and destroyed 27 tanks. We may get later revisions on how many people have died, but however many people it takes to operate 27 tanks, I assume that means at least 50-ish. Probably more, but that would be my minimum guess would be 20, obviously 27, but probably 50-ish. Soldiers that were in some way allied to Assad. Not even sure who the soldiers are yet. As far as I know, as far as the time when I'm recording this podcast, that information has not been released yet. I will update people when I know. It sounds like the early speculation is that these were either Iraqi Sunni militia forces, Iranian militia forces, possibly actually Iranian soldiers, or Hezbollah, or simply Syrian militia, possibly loyal to Assad or the Assad government themselves. And so it was somebody within that alliance that were in these tanks that were driving towards a U.S. base somewhere near where the Syrian, Iraqi, and Jordanian borders intersect. So if you pull up a map and look at that area, that's where it happened. U.S. base is located, I believe, about 15 miles from that border, or possibly about 55 kilometers from that border. I read that in two different sources said the two different distances. So either one, but that's relatively close to where those three borders come together. I have read that area is actually protected by the de-escalation zone, and that is, I guess, technically a no-fly zone. And so the U.S., according to the deal reached by Turkey, Iran, and Russia, the U.S. should not have carried out that airstrike in that area. However, the U.S. has kind of said that, yeah, we're going to kind of do what we want there anyways. And this would have been on the edge of the de-escalation zone. It's not like they're bombing in Damascus. So the reports is that a convoy of vehicles who were loyal to the Assad government were approaching a U.S. base and were something like maybe 50 miles away or so, and then the U.S. contacted Russia, and Russia was either unable to get these troops to stop what they were doing, or the U.S. didn't, I don't know what happened, but the U.S. claims they contacted Russia. I don't even know if the U.S. contacted Russia before. They could have done after. The U.S. claims that the U.S. jets buzzed the convoy and then fired missiles as like a warning shot. I would assume that if they did this would be enough of a warning to the tanks to know, like, hey, whatever you're doing right now may get you blown up. I would guess that they would receive that message. That seems like a pretty clear message to me. But that's assuming that the U.S. planes did do that, and that their first thing they did wasn't blow up one of the tanks. I really don't know. And so then the U.S., what we do know is that the U.S. blew up some number of the tanks in the convoy. So before I don't want to speculate too much on what actually happened. I'm sure over the weekend we will get more and more details about this, and when I talk on the Monday show, whether I do it with Will or myself, this will definitely be something discussed. Tons of political implications, but we'll see who let's see who died, how many died, and did the U.S. warn Russia first, I think are the most important details that we need to get at this point. Also in Syria, we have a report coming out from a Syrian journalist. A bunch of them went undercover and just kind of drove around the Idlib province in Syria, which is the area where the Syrian rebels have their stronghold. Lately, the Assad government has been making deals with Syrian rebel-held towns that are under siege, where they let all the rebels, anybody loyal to the rebels, go to the Idlib province, and then the Syrian government will, allow them free passage in exchange for them not continuing to fight. So the reporter went up there, and the findings were that there really wasn't a moderate rebel presence. I believe they only crossed one checkpoint controlled by the Free Syrian Army, and the rest of the checkpoints were controlled by the Al-Qaeda-linked groups, including this interesting jihadist group that has been coming up lately, which is a Chinese jihadist group. And I'm hoping that, I think Will has a little bit more information on these guys. So hopefully we'll figure a little bit out about these people next weekend. And it's just very clear that the Idlib province and at this point the Syrian rebellion is now controlled by groups loyal to the al-Nusra Front, and if this is a problem for you, then this needs to be known what's happening, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. This is a problem, because it was reported that the Free Syrian Army says that the U.S. has resumed supporting at least part of their cause. For most of Obama's second term in office, the U.S. government supported the Free Syrian Army as moderate rebels opposed to the Assad government. However, it's become clear that the jihadists had taken them over, and so Obama even stopped support for the Free Syrian Army, I believe, in January. This was the CIA program where they spent tons of money to train and arm these groups, and I think, they really haven't had much success. The Free Syrian Army is now just a very small part of the Syrian rebellion at this point. But the Free Syrian Army announced an alliance with several groups, including groups that have ties to Al-Qaeda, including the Mujahideen in Syria, who has worked with and has an alliance with the al-Nusra Front, and I believe at one point in time was actually sworn loyal to Zawahiri. Of course, Zawahiri has said, don't say you're loyal to Al-Qaeda anymore, the U.S. won't give you weapons then. But the U.S. continues to give them weapons anyways, so Zawahiri's playing it safe, and the U.S. will just give them the weapons no matter what ridiculous thing they say. And this was also reflected in a story I read that ran on Alternet that really just talked to some people who were pro-Syrian rebellion at first and were anti-ISIS, who now say all of them just, kind of clearly paint the picture that, hey, we wanted to get rid of Assad, but it turns out the alternative to Assad is a bunch of jihadists, so we want Assad again. And that was kind of the narrative and the feeling among a lot of the civilians. Two quick stories, maybe not quite, stories about Yemen. First, 180 people at least, the numbers now may be over 200, that have died of cholera in Yemen since the end of April. This is like the newest outbreak of cholera in Yemen. The first time it happened, it didn't turn out to be too big of a deal. People were fearing it was going to be a lot worse in Aden, but I guess luckily the health services in that part of the country were necessary to what it takes to fight cholera, because cholera really shouldn't kill someone anymore, because you just need fluids and vitamins, because cholera just makes you have super really bad diarrhea. Only in the worst parts of the world can you crap so much that you kill yourself, and that's unfortunately what's happening to the people. And I kind of wish I wouldn't have said it like that, because I don't want to make light of the situation. I also read a story from for the Mono Relief NGO, which provides aid to Yemen. The foundation leader there said that he went to Yemen and visited some people, and in towns where there's some fighting going on, people are living in caves. They're eating meals every 2 days. Even when they get food, they don't eat every day because they know they'll have to save it or they'll starve next week. Imagine a life where you have two forces fighting for control of the land that you live on. Maybe you don't really have an opinion, because your biggest concerns right now are, I'm really hungry, I haven't eaten in a day, and I won't get to eat till tomorrow. Hopefully I don't get this disease where if I catch it, I'm going to have diarrhea until I die. And I also live in a cave and don't have a house, because if I live in a house, it'll get bombed. I can't even imagine what it must be like to be in that position. And the most unfortunate and frustrating part is that the U.S. is helping that situation to be the case in Yemen. no matter what side you would prefer to win in this war, whether it be the Houthis or the Saudi Arabian government in Yemen, the simple fact is the war couldn't have continued this long without the U.S. support in that country. And a resolution to that war would allow these people to not live in caves, to be able to have access to the most basic of medical care. That way they don't die of cholera by having diarrhea until they die. And maybe they could eat a meal every day. I mean, these are like the basic things that could happen to these people if they weren't living in a war-torn country, in a war supported by the United States. In a lot of ways, we subsidize an awful large cost of Saudi's war there. So, I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting. On that note, I'm going to plug my show. That sounds real nice. So if you like my show, please share my show. I know sometimes the topics aren't nice and easy to talk about, but we're starving people to death. It's an awful situation in the Middle East, and largely because of the actions of the U.S. government. So if you're like me and this really makes you mad and you really don't want to have to pay taxes to a government that's going to go and starve a bunch of people, please share my show and get it out there to more people. The more people that see it, the better chance we have of ending some of these wars, bringing some of the troops home, having some real peace and prosperity at home, and then allowing people overseas to start to rebuild their lives. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE and on Facebook at Kyle's Files. Files is spelled Files. I've been pretty active on there the past couple of days, so check out. I've been posting a lot of stories. Like the page. I'm getting close to 100 likes. That'd be a cool number to get to. And just tell people about the show. That's the main point. Oh, the website is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. Thanks, everybody.